about being a peaceful warrior. It's an idea that popped in my head this morning. We've all heard the books, maybe seen the film. Dan Millman back in the day made his name with the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior in that series. And at the time they were quite unique. It was a way of, bridging the spiritual and normie sort of community, and offered something that was relatable because of the mythology and the allegory and the analogies that were offered through the story. The basic principle, the basic premise of a peaceful warrior is, of course, someone who can contend with life, reconcile with everything that's thrown at you, sometimes going through extreme injury and trauma and assault and imposition, and still find that center, find that peace, and find a way to express themselves and to embody the greater knowing, the remembering, the understanding, the comprehension of what one is here to do, why one is here, and how ultimately there's a lot more magic available to us if we let go of those attachments and liberate ourselves of the narratives and the stories and the ideas that are constantly coming into our field, into our home, into our heart, into our minds, to steal away and to siphon off that precious and yet unlimited font that is the divine, the original creative spark that we embody, the way that we express and explore humanity in this particular avatar, in this particular way, in this particular realm, this 3D material, slow and clunky sort of expression that we contend with on a day-to-day basis. A peaceful warrior is someone that takes it in stride, but doesn't always get it right, obviously. We can't predict all of the potentials and the outcomes. We can't know what people are going to do and say and ultimately be in the end. We can know ourselves, and even then, with ourselves, we are lying to ourselves, deceiving ourselves, being disingenuous, inauthentic, and pursuing the ideas and the notions and those paradigms and beliefs that were inculcated through our experiences and through our upbringing, through our circumstances and situations. So it's that work that we all have to engage in this life, whether or not we choose to do it actively and with conscious awareness. It's going to be part of the journey one way or another. And I think that we can benefit most from engaging in a conscious and accepting and grateful way, as opposed to in a contentious and compulsory and combative, conflicting, contrasting manner. We can work with the flow, we can work with what's offered, we can reframe things to understand that there's a blessing likely in everything that is offered, and we can say no, and we can return to that peaceful center. So a peaceful warrior is someone that goes through these things, engages in life with that greater awareness, that heartful, encompassing sort of presence, understanding that shit is going to happen, stuff's going to fly at you. There will be attacks and impositions, and that will help us steel our nerves, maybe strengthen our bodies, maybe develop that resilience, develop that self-reliance, or develop ways to collaborate and co-create with others if we're so inclined. Some of us are a little more of the lone wolf sort of personality type and prefer more the solitary way about exploring this life. Others require the presence of friends, family, mentors, teachers, instructors, people with which to help to sharpen their blades and hone their skills. And that's completely fine. And there's everything in between. And not all of us, of course, are privileged to have the opportunity necessarily to consider these higher ideals and the spiritual and esoteric and metaphysical ideas of life. We might not necessarily the presence of mind, but the circumstance we're in, at least right now. We might not even have that time of day or the freedom to explore these things in a way that I'm describing here. But no matter where we are, we do have choice. And no matter where we are, we can find a blessing in it, something to unearth, unravel, evolve, reveal about ourselves in that process, because we are not there by any accident, and it could be entirely terrible, horrible, violent, and untenable, but nothing's permanent about it, and we have to find a way. I'm not trying to minimize suffering and pain and struggle. I'm just saying reframing and grasping the 10,000 foot view, looking down on this whole story, this whole lifetime, this whole narrative, and this one little blip of time that we get to experience this life, to reframe and to give it really appreciate things from a different perspective, regardless of your circumstance or situation. For a lot of us, we tend to blow things out of proportion or get overly sensitized simply because it's a cumulative effect, and that disempowering sort of energy just builds and builds and builds and just, stays in the body and stays in our energy systems because we don't find ways to dispel it or find those healthy and creative outlets or find people to talk with to help us dispel these energies. And wherever we are, regardless of our situation or circumstance, we can choose differently. We can choose otherwise, and to return to that peaceful center, live into that warrior self that's going to be a little more resilient next time, a little more aware of how somebody is trying to confuse or manipulate us, a little bit more aware of how the story that's being handed down is likely fabricated, not entirely real, a little more aware, a little more present, a little more capable of seeing through the lies and distortions that are out there in the story that are threatening our lives and our plans with upheaval and the unsuspecting and surprising and unpredictable, so that we feel that we're out of control. So the peaceful warrior is the sojourner that learns how to find ways to persist, to continue, to overcome, and to understand when overwhelm happens, and to appreciate that we don't always get it right, and to recalibrate, reassess, to reset, to get a little more still, a little more often perhaps, so that we can find ourselves again through the noise, to get better information, to get better data from outside, which allows us a little bit more discernment and the capacity to develop that muscle. The peaceful warrior is tried and true, authentic, real to themselves, first and foremost. They don't put on the pretense and the falsities and the masks and presentation, the performative when they're in public, because that's exhausting, because that's fatiguing, because that's disingenuous, and people will feel these things. And if you're wanting to have real and authentic relationships and real and authentic success, it can't be built and found upon fiction and deception and the performative, as opposed to something that's real and based on genuine experience and understanding. And naturally, everyone has their own version of this peaceful warrior expression, something that we find and define and redefine all throughout life. We find that balance. Every time we're knocked off balance, we find again that walk, that stride, that way to present ourselves to the world when we're knocked around and injured or traumatized or otherwise. We find our way back to the vertical after being knocked on our butts now and again. So don't compare yourself to how someone else might be seemingly succeeding and much stronger or more resilient or tougher than you in these regards. You don't know their story. You don't know what they've had to deal with. You don't know where they come from. Even if you've known them most of your lives, you probably don't really know their entire makeup and how they came to the place that they are now. And you don't know if they could simply be pretending and putting up a front. As I was saying, it could be simply their public persona, and in private they could be suffering badly. Nevertheless, we don't want to presume the negative either. So use that as data, as information, as feedback, as simply as a way to reorient and reflect back to yourself what you may be disregarding, deferring, setting aside, or ignoring about your own process, to dispel those potentially stuck inertial energies that are keeping you from finding that sort of peaceful warrior self, so that you can proceed through your life with purpose, with meaning, with a confidence and a presence and constitution that is uniquely your own. If you look up the definition of warrior, you will probably find something to the effect of someone who has experience in warfare. And there probably couldn't be too finer a point in our modern era, Some people call it fifth generation warfare, but what we're in the midst of right now is psychological warfare, spiritual warfare, psychic warfare. Some parts of the world are engaged in forever wars, unfortunately, because Western empire and other interests and the banking cartel and geopolitical players and, as I've described, the parasites and predators of this self-professed elite class like to pit countries and nations and cultures against each other to keep prices, manageable for resources perhaps. Maybe they're doing it for fun. Maybe they're just psychopathic and that's all they know how to do. The side effects and the downstream effects, of course, is that we in the Western world, or whoever might be watching this particular film that isn't in that particular perpetual war zone, has a different kind of warfare to contend with. So the idea of the peaceful warrior, again, is to find this sort of this pace, this stability, this confidence in your process, in your life, in pursuing that which interests you, that which you love, and what you find joy in, the relationships or family, career, vocation, whatever it might be that pulls at your heartstrings and satisfies your soul urge. In amidst the battle in the world and the psychological warfare, psychological operations that are inundating our sensorial systems and assaulting our sensitivities and sensibilities at all times, it's something that we simply have to be aware of, but realize that we're more than capable of reconciling, recognize that we're more than capable of handling it, of rising to the challenge, of dispelling these energies, of reconciling with how they might be threatening our livelihoods or our families or our personal spiritual domain. We have the capabilities. These things are only information, they're data, as I've said before. They're ideas, they're reflections, they're the mirroring, they're the challenge for you to rise to the occasion, to step into your real power, to step into your knowing. And that as a peaceful warrior, you are more than capable. That's what you're here for. In this time, in this era, in this atmosphere of perpetual legitimate and manufactured crises, in this era of fifth generation warfare, if you want to call it, it's all energy. It's psychic, spiritual, metaphysical, however you want to compartmentalize it or contain it, describe it, contend with it. It's for you to decide and for you to choose and for you to remember that you're not here by accident. There is a reason for your existence and that you are more than capable of handling anything and being that peaceful warrior at the same time. Have a good one.
Proven that the pattern changes, that emotion moves you, that the deepest pain is revealed. So listen to the uttered phrasing